Hello, this is Senator Katie Fry Hester, and you are listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, the official podcast of the Maryland Association of Counties and your best source for Maryland politics and policy.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Canale here, today with a special guest from the Maryland Chamber of Commerce. We have with us Andrew Griffin. He is the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the Maryland Chamber, leads advocacy efforts on behalf of their 6,800 plus members of the business community here in Maryland. Today, we're going to get into looking ahead to the next session, talk about some of the Chamber's priorities, how a lot of these policy issues intersect with counties. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us today. I very much appreciate it. How are things going over at the Chamber, as somehow it is mid-November and we are rapidly approaching the 2024 session?
No, thanks. Thanks, Kevin, for having me. Happy to be here. Happy to talk about what we have on tap as we look forward to 24. But it is almost like, I think, we're talking just before hopping on. It's kind of almost like the sessions, there's never any in between anymore. You just kind of roll from one to the next. This interim has been really busy for us. I think there's a lot of big issues coming down the pike, and people spent the summer looking at them. So, I know we're sitting on Transportation Commission. There's a lot of regulatory stuff that we've been engaged with over the summer. So we've just been busy.
Yeah, same here. And, I know that the Chamber also hosts and sponsors a bunch of events. And of course, that takes up a chunk of time. Those are always good. MACo's in the same boat, but it's challenging. And I agree, there are a lot of heavy policy issues kind of sitting out there. I know MACo is also involved on the Train Commission, transportation, family medical leave. Of course, counties are big employers. I know that the Chamber is front and center on that issue. So I'm sure a lot of back and forth with your members and trying to figure out how to make things work and educating your members on actually what is out there. Because I think a lot of people don't think about that when session is over. It's like, okay, well, all the people here who have been advocating understand what's going on and understand these bills, but then you need to get that message out. For you, we have 24 members. We have 23 counties in Baltimore City, but I mentioned earlier, I think you're probably close to 7,000 members. That has to be a challenge to make sure that you're reaching every nook and cranny. And I know I would be anxious about that, and I'm sure you are as well. How do you do that? How do you keep up with that? And how do you deal with sort of like constituent issues from a community that's that large?
Yeah, great point. Great question. It was slightly over 6,800 member businesses. We're the largest business advocacy organization in the state. The vast majority of those members, we'll say, 6,300 or so of those are what we would call medium and small businesses, who, the medium and small businesses are the primary employers in Maryland. And then maybe another 500 are what you would consider kind of your bigger, larger, our anchor employers, anchor businesses in the state, the homegrown ones that we're really proud of. Think of your household names, right? Under Armour's, T. Rowe Price's, Lockheed Martin's, all of those Maryland companies are, they make up maybe about another 500 of the 6,800. So it can be difficult for us, depending on business size and industry, issues impact businesses differently. And so we're always in the position of kind of walking that line, trying to find a way. Our charge, right, is to work on and improve the overall business climate, and that's what everybody's stake in the game is here at the Chamber. And so we look at issues through a lens. It's like, hey, is this going to be good for business of all sizes, of industries of all different industries? And so it can be difficult, particularly when a small business, says, I look at it and want it this way, or a big business says, I look at it and look at this way. Take paid leave, for example. The Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program, this new program that's getting ready to roll out, it's a monster of a program. There's a huge education component to that, particularly to the small businesses who are really going to be impacted by it. They weren't really already offering these types of benefits, or maybe some of our larger employers are. They may be exempted from the program because they have similar benefits on the books already. And so they won't have to do the state program, but, trying to reach every small business, every small employer, and then also their employees around the state so that when they start making a contribution to a new program out of their paycheck, people aren't caught by surprise. And so it's a challenge. You're forever educating, forever messaging.
Yeah, and certainly understandable. I mean, again, that we have a much smaller membership, but certainly we have large and small counties. We have urban and rural counties. It's kind of all over the map. But what I find, and I talk about this a lot, I would say the vast majority of our issues, and I know you're member driven as well. I mean, when we bring our legislative committee in with an elected official from every single jurisdiction, every Wednesday during session, they come in and we present bills to them and they vote on them. And I'd say, well north of 90% of the time, it's unanimous, because I think usually people can take off their big hat, their little hat, their D hat, their R hat, their urban and rural hat, and they come in and they just think about what's best for counties generally. So regardless of what they think politically or their personal views, they try to take that lens of what is best for county governments. And generally for us, we like flexibility, right? We don't want the state telling us what to do. I know that, you're in the same boat, but I do want to talk about that flexibility and how that affects your members, because I know the business community doesn't like, a patchwork approach where, you may have 20 different kind of regulations depending on what county you're in. So how do you draw that line? And I mean, where do your members want to be when it comes to like statewide preemption versus letting local governments make decisions locally? And how does that affect your members? Because certainly you can have folks in different counties with different sets of regulations, and that has to have an impact on your advocacy generally.
Yeah, it does. Broadly speaking, very broad, and this is across, not cherry picking issues, but most businesses, right, they're operating certainly across county lines, they're operating across state lines. Most larger employers are operating across international boundaries. And so to them, it is really important to have, the rules apply, be the same, whether they have a facility in Maryland or a facility in Virginia or a facility in New Mexico. I'm just going to cherry pick minimum wage for no reason, but let's just say the minimum wage here is different than there. It's just an additional level of compliance. You can think of something it's kind of going around the state right now. I know rent control legislation, and we don't get overly involved in too much of the local stuff, but from our end, certainly when you have developers or people building multi-family housing, multi-unit housing, saying, well, I can't build in this county because the numbers don't work. The math doesn't math. So I have to build in this county, but there's no guarantee that it's not going to work out down the road. It's just that level of regulatory consistency, right? That's what businesses want. They want predictability from year to year and across state lines. I mean, we see it in tons of policies, whether it's data privacy issues, which is a huge one the legislature is going to be dealing with. Dealing with that is one of our top priorities for the 24th session. But people and how companies are dealing with data and people's user experience online crosses state lines easily. And to say, well, you're going to treat someone in Maryland differently than they're going to be treated in New Jersey or Connecticut or Virginia, and how you have to handle that, and their online experience is going to be different in Maryland. And then when they are in their car on their phone and they drive across the border to Delaware, that online experience is different. Difficult arena to work in. So broadly speaking, we do like preemption, but certainly we pick and choose the issues.
Sure. And I think that's fair. And speaking of legislative priorities, I do want to get into that, Andrew. And you mentioned data privacy. I know that is a huge deal for your folks. Talk a little bit briefly about that. This is not as big of an issue for MACo, although things like AI certainly are, and that is a big deal for the business community as well. So data privacy generally is interesting. Talk a little bit about that and what you're expecting in the upcoming session and where you expect your folks will be.
Yeah, so data privacy, and I'll just broadly say, the Chamber's legislative priorities, what I'll talk about here, it's mostly kind of in stone, but they haven't been released quite yet. Waiting on that final approval, which will kind of come after Thanksgiving from our legislative committee. And then, certainly it'll be pushed out and published on our website and email. So if people are interested, they can find it on our website. But Data privacy is an issue that the General Assembly has dealt with the last handful of sessions. And essentially what we're talking about is how companies who are collecting people's data, how they are using, storing that data, and then which encompasses a whole wide variety of things. But essentially what we're looking at is as states have passed these laws, we want to see, again, this is going back to a level of predictability across states. And so that as companies who are complying across the country, and companies always, it's their objective to be in compliance, that, things are as smooth across state lines. And certainly there are tweaks. And so we're just kind of looking to avoid the disasters we've seen in other states, but also, pass a bill that is protecting customers' data while allowing companies to be able to develop and utilize cutting edge technology. So,
and you talk about a technology like AI, and we hear this term, like the sandbox, where states are allowing companies to sort of pursue that technology without implications and wanting folks to come and look. A big emphasis from our governor has been that we want Maryland to be a technology savvy state. We want that business in our state. We've had a dust up recently about data centers. I know you're involved in that as well. I'm pretty confident that can get resolved. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, these kind of issues, privacy issues, are certainly hot button topics. And when you talk about data, I mean, look, nobody wants their data to be out there. So, security is one thing. And then what you're doing with that data, whether it's making it to a secondary market or whatnot, I mean, all of this stuff is super complicated. I know that there has been, like you said, over the past few years, a ton of back and forth about this stuff. I've talked to legislators who say this is the year Maryland needs a data privacy bill. So some of the benefits, I think, to waiting a bit is that you can see how things play out in other states. I know Maryland likes to be a leader and do things first, but I think on an issue as complicated as this one and with so many stakeholders, it may be an advantage for Maryland to sort of, sit back and then pass a bill once we've seen what other states have done and sort of learn from their mistakes.
Yeah, and I think that's where we are. And I think, your assessment on the data privacy stuff is kind of right on the money. I think that, I think we can expect some serious movement and consideration this session. But we've been able to benefit from, at least a dozen states have passed these bills now. And we've got great models. We see states are doing a really good job in this policy realm, where other states have not done such a great job, and there've been some pretty big fallout because of it. And so we're in a good position to learn and make smart decisions and find a good path forward, which is, that's like the ideal situation in policy making, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know data privacy is a big deal. I want to get into a few things where the Chamber and MACo, I think, are pretty much aligned in terms of these two issues being a big problem on the horizon and wanting to fix them. Number one, and I don't think some people would look to the Chamber and understand why the Chamber would care so much, but transportation and affordable housing are two of the biggest issues the state faces. For counties, local governments own and maintain 90% of the roads in Maryland. We took a big hit on our transportation funding back in the Great Recession, and that money never came back to counties. So we've made some advances in previous years, but now the issue is we're moving to electric vehicles. They don't use gas. We rely on the gas tax to fund our roadways and our road maintenance. Talk a little bit about why transportation is so important for the Chamber. And then on the same note, affordable housing, obviously a big issue with a lot of different components and a lot of reasons, I think, as to why we're in the position we're in. I don't think it's any one issue or any one stakeholder that's causing the problem, but it's a big issue. And I think everybody can come to the table and try and work this out. MACo has made that a legislative priority and initiative for the next session. We've been working closely with the governor and with Secretary Day about, what they'd like to do and what we'd like to see. So from the Chamber's perspective, what about transportation and affordable housing is so important and has your folks certainly worked up like ours?
We view most of these issues through the lens of competitiveness, right? And we've heard Governor Moore use that term a lot. And, our job here is we want to increase the state's economic competitiveness. Part of that is changing the perception of Maryland, right? The perception of doing business here is is not a good one. Despite that, we've got a lot of fantastic assets. And so we need to focus on the areas we're not doing well. One of them, hands down, is transportation. The traffic in Maryland is a drag on the economy. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, right? Getting to and from work, getting to and from your house, being able to leave work and get to your kid's baseball game in time is a major drag on the economy. And so I have businesses tell me all the time, particularly in the Montgomery County, Prince George's County, outside DC, that area, tell me, hey, traffic, it takes me, how much of my life do I waste sitting on the roads? My employees can't reliably get to work on time. They're leaving to drop their kid off at daycare and then to get to work so early. Anecdotal story, I had a guy who owns a paper company in Montgomery County tell me that the traffic is so bad when they have to make deliveries into Virginia that they'll schedule and know that when a delivery is going across the border into Virginia, across the American Legion Bridge, the traffic will be so bad that person won't be able to come back within the same workday. Yeah. So that's just it's not sustainable for businesses. And so we want to be able to recruit businesses to come here and invest and grow. They don't want to do it when, we can't find solutions to the problems that we have. And so that's why we're getting involved, and you're going to see us really advocate for, we've got to fix this transportation funding issue, right? Mm-hmm. The transportation trust fund is not sustainable over the long term. Its funding mechanism is diminishing. And so there's going to have to be creative ways of getting money in there to fix some of these transportation problems.
Yeah, and I assume you take the same stance on affordable and workforce housing, right? I mean, you have to have housing if you want to have business. So
cost of housing, it's such an issue for competitiveness, right? And we want people to come here and create jobs, but it's really difficult when employees can't afford to live where a company's going to locate, or there's not enough housing, or those are all issues that, and we know, if folks haven't seen, we publish annually what's called a competitiveness book, Red Book. It's a small little kind of like red handheld deal that's 130 plus different measures of where does the state rank in a whole bunch of different statistic areas. And housing, I mean, cost of housing is through the roof. I mean, we're dragging compared to other 50 states. And that doesn't help us recruit and retain business and the best talent, right? That's what businesses want. They want to bring the best talent here. If they can't afford to live here, you're not going to be successful.
Right. And I think a lot of times people think about business and they just think, oh, well, they're just going to look at the tax rates and that's how they'll decide where to go. But it's way more complicated than that, right? They're looking at things like infrastructure, transportation. They're looking at housing. They're looking at schools, right? They're looking at all of these things because, like you just said, you can't retain and recruit the best if you can't give them a great quality of life. So it totally makes sense to me. And I think, we're going to be aligned on those issues in terms of trying to make real progress. And, again, mentioning taxes, I don't want to tilt you, and I'll throw around some terms that'll probably make you recoil, but like throwback rule and combined reporting, right? We know that the state has a structural deficit on the horizon, one that's unattainable in future years. And so there are going to have to be some tough decisions about whether, they go after revenue or they try and rein in some spending a bit. But I don't know if they're going to need to do anything this next session. I think that for now, the state can maintain and they can move things around and find money under couch cushions and whatnot to make it work. But when you get into the out years, that's where the state really runs into a problem. So I'm sure a lot of your folks and your members are concerned about taxes and whether that be local, state, or federal taxes and what the state wants to do there, especially when it comes to stuff like combined reporting. That's been floating around for many, many years. Fortunately for Mako, we don't really get involved in corporate tax issues. A small percentage of that goes in to highway user revenue, but it's really not our issue. So talk a little bit about that, and just sort of when the state has a problem like this, and when it's low on cash, and this is again, like over the past few years, the state has been flush with cash, and we've been trying to tell our members that money's gone, it's going away. Don't fall in love with this. We are also really, I mean, we're nervous normally when the state is in this position because typically it means that the state is going to need to shift some costs onto counties. And for businesses, you need to be concerned, right, about the tax climate. And I'm sure you're hearing about this from your members. So what do you see? What are you telling your members in terms of, the next session and even in the out years? Like, what do you expect?
Yeah. It was a nice situation when the state was flush with cash, wasn't it? I don't know that
It was
in the
amazing.
chamber we haven't had to sweat the business tax scenario the last couple sessions because the cash situation's been great.
Right.
I think they spent it faster than they got it though.
Yeah.
So we're like everybody else. We are anxiously just kind of watching the budget situation to where it goes. Right. The reality is when the state gets into a budget crunch and they feel pressed to go and find fresh money, unfortunately the business world is usually the biggest gorilla in the room. And so, they want to take their pound of flesh. I'm not sure if I'm reading my political tea leaves, what I think is going to happen this year. But, we'll see those conversations about making large corporate climate tax changes. And you mentioned two of them: combined reporting, throwback rule, looking at those issues and the corporate tax environment through a competitiveness lens. Before I even get into combined reporting or throwback rule, we look at our regional neighbors and what the states around us are doing. They're certainly not being stagnant. They're being aggressive. They're lowering the corporate tax rates. Pennsylvania has had the highest corporate tax rate on the East Coast for many, many years. They're going from 9.99 down to 4.99. They're phasing it out over a 10-year period because they realize that's one of the last things holding them back from being a crown jewel of economic development on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. New Jersey they had a temporary corporate tax surcharge which expired, and they let it expire because they're like, we need to be more attractive to business. Virginia continues to push the limits. Delaware continues to push the limits on, we want to attract and retain business, and we want to grow business here. Maryland certainly shouldn't be stagnant, right? We should be pushing the envelope also, but going in the other direction, adopting things like the throwback rule or combined reporting, it does the opposite. It not only makes us, we're not being aggressive at trying to attract businesses, we're actively chasing them away. And I think some other states are actually setting really good examples for us. You're seeing states repeal that have adopted the throwback rule. They're repealing it because it's just not effective and it's a deterrent to business. We know New Jersey is going to roll back major components of their combined reporting rules there because it's a major deterrent to business. And so it's, to us, the writing on the wall for adopting these types of policies is just really bad for our economic competitiveness. And really, there's no data, right? That at the end of the day, I could talk about this till I'm blue in the face, but elected officials are looking for reliable revenue and kind of adopting creative tax schemes that hasn't proven out to be reliable revenue. We just saw Minnesota last year not adopt basically a more aggressive form of combined reporting because they said this is just not reliable. We can't count on this money year over year. And so I think it would just be really bad policy for the state to go that way. But we'll wait and see. And as always, we'll have the conversation when we need to.
Yeah. And I mean, look, obviously, I understand where the chamber is on this. I think, we just talked about needing to provide services to bring businesses to Maryland, like schools and infrastructure. And so you need money to do that. But certainly I can understand from your perspective that there's probably ways that the General Assembly could rein in some spending instead of, these big corporate tax reforms that certainly your folks are concerned with. So obviously, we need tax revenue, but it's always a question about where you get it. And when you pull one lever, you have to see what that's going to mean for everything else. And of course, you don't want to go too far where you're disincentivizing business, but you also, we need to pay for a big education reform. So there are a lot of things on the table. And I think that the state is going to need to take a balanced approach. And I know you could talk about that all day. I've heard you do it.
Yeah. So. Just to piggyback on your points. Listen, there is no way around. In my mind, there's no way around. If the state wants to be responsible with its budget, it's going to have to take some level. It's going to have some measure of spending cuts. I mean, you have to. If you want to be a responsible steward of the state's budget and taxpayer dollars, that doesn't mean you can't raise new revenue somewhere, but you should be taking responsible cuts somewhere else. And I think that just shows the voters good faith that, hey, I'm a responsible steward of your money. And then I think it depends on how you look at it. The business community, we would say you want more revenue, you need to expand your tax base, create more jobs, create more businesses. That's how you get more revenue in the door, not by squeezing more money out of the people that you're chasing out. And
Right.
so, it's just a different view on how to solve the problem.
Right. And I know that, MACo and the chamber have come together and sat at the table together defending, some of our business tax breaks in Maryland. And there have been efforts to sort of repeal those. Enterprise zones come to mind. And I think for counties, those are really good programs that benefit the community. So I think, at least from talking with counties, particularly out in Western Maryland and on the shore, where it's sometimes harder to attract investment, they feel like the business programs that we have in the state, enterprise zones, other credits and tax incentives of that nature that are designed to bring business into certain areas work very well. And so we understand that there are folks who want to reform our tax system. And for years and years, I think that the Department of Legislative Services has said that some of these programs aren't worth it. And we see that time and time again. But when you talk to people on the ground, they feel like it's very beneficial. You talk to economic development folks. And like you said earlier, we need to expand our tax base. So we want to thread that needle in terms of bringing jobs, but also making sure that we have equitable taxation and everyone's paying their fair share. So it's always a tough conversation, but I know that the chamber is always at the table. You're always in the mix and trying to educate lawmakers, bringing that feedback directly to lawmakers and giving them, real world stories, like you said earlier, about the print shop owner. I mean, that's if I hear that, I'm like, wow, that's not good. I wouldn't want to work in this state. So those are all the kind of things that you have to bring from your members, and we bring that from our members, from the boots on the ground. And I think that's super effective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the education component it's a big one. It's connecting the policies, as opposed to me just saying this is good because of X, Y, Z, or this is great on the ground. You need someone to show up and say, this is the experience.
Right. What else is the chamber looking at? I mean, I know you haven't officially released your initiatives, your priorities, but I think you can tell what's coming and where you're going to be. For what it's worth, I mean, I'm sure and you do. MACo has adopted another initiative to enhance and increase local revenue flexibility. I'm sure that gives you some pause. But I mean, again, we want to do this in a way that we're not overburdening any one community. That we look, the bottom line is we have to pay for all the things the state wants us to pay for. And, these are a lot of big policy issues that cost a lot of money, and there's only so much to go around. So we need to thread the needle. We need to be balanced with the approach. But what else do you see as taking a ton of your time in the next legislative session? I mean, because we know there will be things that pop up that you don't think take any time, but they do. So are you anticipating anything of that nature for the next session? What are you looking forward to besides all the big issues that we've already talked about?
Yeah. I'll just say, to your point that counties, a lot has been placed on the backs of counties, particularly as we've talked about the education funding issue. I think it's incumbent on certainly me and the business community, but I think the legislature to make sure that counties have all the tools in the toolbox to be able to meet those funding requests. Part of that is they need to be able to attract business. We were talking about the data center issue earlier. I mean, if you're going to cut a county's ability to collect some pretty significant property tax out from under them, and then say, hey, by the way, you got to come up with more money. Right. It's just not a strategy to let people, be able to win. And each county has its ability to make decisions as to whether or not they want certain businesses located there or not. But certainly at the state level, they should be making that decision. So I think the two other items I think that we're going to be working on from a proactive standpoint that I would just kind of put on your radar. The last handful of sessions, really since COVID, we have gotten really involved in childcare issues. It has been and remains a huge issue to people returning to the workforce, particularly women. It was such significant loss of childcare slots in the state during COVID that anyone with kids knows it's really difficult to find childcare.
Yes.
That prevents people from getting to work, and it's driven the cost of childcare up. And so we're really and because of that, employers said, "Hey, listen, we need to really engage to find solutions to this." And so we have and will continue to engage on a whole suite of child care related issues, dealing with funding, affordability, access. How do we increase? Again, it's all economic development, right? These are small businesses, most of them women owned. How are we creating more businesses? It's a positive thing. And then I think the other thing you're going to see us really pushing on is doing something about the state's military retirement income situation. Virginia just changed its laws. They eliminated their age restriction for their income tax requirement on military retirement income. We really are now just so far out of step with all of our neighbors and how we treat military retirement income. We have 19 military installations in Maryland. That's the largest concentration in any other state. That's more than California. We have a ton of veterans who take early retirement here. It's a huge workforce issue. They move to Virginia. They move to Delaware. They don't stay here. Your average military retiree retires in their early 50s. They've got another decade left of a second career. We want them to be utilizing their expertise and going to work in all of the industry sectors that we have a difficult time finding qualified workforce for here, but cyber, IT, certainly all of your defense contracting that's headquartered here, they can't find good people. And we're literally letting our workforce walk across the border to somewhere else because we're not willing to match or take an aggressive stance on how we treat their retirement income is silly. We're losing good sections of the community. We're losing critical piece of the workforce. And so we're going to really push to try to reform that. And I think more has to be done. And so you hear us talk a lot about that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but, Maryland, subtraction modifications and the way our tax system works. I mean, if the state gives a benefit for someone's income tax, that flows through to county income tax as well, even if we don't agree. So we love credits, and we love when the General Assembly provides counties with the tools to enact those benefits locally. We have a number of counties that provide property tax relief for veterans, of course, even above and beyond what the state mandates. So that's an interesting conversation. Certainly, I think that MACo just generally doesn't like subtraction modifications. So we don't like the way that the state structures the tax policy in that way. We're getting a new tax system. We've been talking to the comptroller's office about trying to separate and decouple some of this stuff so that the state makes a decision. It doesn't automatically affect county revenue. I'm hopeful there, but I certainly agree. Look, I mean, we have a number of local elected officials who are retired veterans and totally understand the dynamic. You're right. We have all these military installations. We have NSA here. We have a lot of federal government presence and a lot of military. So certainly I can understand that push. It makes a ton of sense. And I think, we're along for that ride, and we want to be part of that conversation in terms of how we can help our veterans through services and tax policy. But certainly counties are mindful of, the revenue impacts. And so again, this is all about threading needles and pulling the right levers. But I think that's totally in line for the chamber to be concerned about that for sure.
Yep.
Anything else that's the top of mind for you before we wrap this up?
That's it. Those are kind of the big things we're looking forward to. There are always surprises. I think that we deal with them as they come. We spent a lot of time last session on attorney general's initiatives that we're not planning on spending time on, and a host of other issues. So I'm sure we'll see things like that. That'll keep us busy.
No doubt. And as we get closer to session and, you start to see more bill language, you get a feel, then we'll see the budget and, we'll see what's on the table. But I expect MACo and the chamber to be in lockstep on a lot of issues. I think we should probably reconvene and have you on again once we're into session, if we can even find the time. But Andrew, I know you have a podcast as well. Tell us how to listen to your thoughts, the chamber's thoughts, and also how to get in touch with the chamber, how to find all this information. What's the website? What are the social medias? Go ahead and let it rip.
Yep. We just launched a brand new website. So certainly a shout out to our marketing communications team. It looks fantastic. mdchamber.org. Check it out. Certainly you'll see our legislative priorities when they're released there at the end of the month. All the social media pages, at MD Chamber, easy to find. We do have a podcast here. It's called Between Two Chambers. We are not on as consistent of a schedule as you all at MACo are. We talk about the issues at the intersection of business and government, and I think people are surprised at how much the two intersect. And so we can check it out there. And if anyone has questions, they want to get in contact with me, I'm pretty easy to find. My email address is agriffin@mdchamber.org. It's probably the easiest way, but certainly my office line, all that stuff, it's just right on the website. So
yeah, and we'll make sure to include all of that in the show notes so that folks know how to get in touch with Andrew and the chamber. And I will agree, your website is awesome. You have a ton of information on there. Even though your priorities aren't released, you have a ton of background information on a lot of the big issues that you're consistently at the table on. So a plethora of resources on your website. It's beautiful. It's brand new. Check it out. We'll put it in the show notes. But Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Again, I think we will have to reconvene. We'll see what happens. But there is a lot of intersection between government and business. And I think in Maryland, I know that the Chamber and MACo have a great relationship, even though we don't agree on everything. We're constantly in contact, and I think that's a good thing. So I'm proud of that. And I know that that's not the case in many states across the country. So that's a good thing. But yeah, we're going to continue to work in lockstep on a lot of these big issues. And, along the way, we'll have disagreements, but at the end of the day, I think we all want the same thing, and that is for this state to thrive and to find the balance in terms of tax policy and employment issues and everything else that businesses care about, to make sure that we have the tax base to do all the great things. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. We could talk for hours and hours and hours, but I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Andrew Griffin from the Maryland Chamber of Commerce. We will put all of the information in the show notes. Thanks again. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all of these episodes will be sent directly to the device of your choice. You can also follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, you should be reading the Conduit Street blog. But for Andrew Griffin, this is Kevin Canale signing off, and we will talk to you soon.